Around the turn of the century, we hit the motherlode of apocalyptic disaster movies. We've got everything. Natural disaster, virus, aliens, zombies, angry plants. I guess a decade ushered in under the rumored threat of mass technological collapse, and then sandwiched between an extreme act of terrorism and the end of the Mayan calendar is going to have a certain vibe.
Looks like the food storm is following an unusual pattern of hitting the world's most famous landmarks first and is now spreading to the rest of the globe.
But while we still get the odd falling Statue of Liberty, they're not the blockbuster staple they were from the mid-90s to 2000s. So, whatever happened to disaster movies? Well, I mean, right. Okay, sure, so essentially, you best start believing in disaster movies, Miss Turner, you're in one. But that doesn't mean the audience's appetite for apocalypse has gone away, just that the following decade gave rise to a different kind of devastation. The world didn't end in 2012, but that year instead gave birth to a new doctrine, a simple phrase that seemed to define our existence, now and in perpetuity, with no end in sight. June 28th, 2012, at horse_ebooks. Everything happens so much. Truly the most evergreen tweet. The following year, Alexis C. Madrigal declared in The Atlantic that the web was now lost to infinite feeds and timelines, organized only by nowness, and making the 2010s a decade sandwiched between the new stranglehold of social media and a pandemic. The looming threat no longer that this will all end, but that it won't. At this point, even a zombie apocalypse would be like, great, another thing I have to deal with. The end, in its various guises, continues to live between a fear and a fantasy. A fascination that increasingly feels a lot like longing. Our history of predicting the end is long and repetitive.
The world will end next week!
And some responses remain just as predictable. Dystopian and post-apocalyptic landscapes continue to thrive in place of immediate disaster. But no fiction is more dystopian than the one weaved by doomsday preppers. Generally white American men projecting a fantasy driven by all the worst impulses the genre could be accused of. Wealth and power and individualism, summarizes Mark O'Connell, author of Notes from an Apocalypse. And it's one of the more obvious cross-pollinations of fear and fetish. Preppers are not preparing for their fears, O'Connell writes. They're preparing for their fantasies. So quick to renounce civilization because they were never fully convinced by society in the first place. Instead longing for a return to modes of masculinity our culture no longer has much use for. A realm where they can reclaim the absolute authority of which they feel modernity has robbed them. Even this obsession with apocalyptic survival betrays an underlying preoccupation with superiority. Just waiting impatiently for civilization to fall so they can say, I told you so.
All the non-believers, they get to eat dirt, and the believers get to spit on their graves.
Not all preppers are writing survivalist fanfiction. As Michelle Moses writes in The New Yorker, the impulse to prep is as much a response to government failings as it is to apocalyptic fantasies. A reaction to their inadequate handling of catastrophes, but still a bleakly isolationist one. Jill Lepore diagnoses this pessimism as the dominant force of modern dystopian literature. No longer a fiction of resistance, it's become a fiction of submission, of an untrusting, lonely, and sullen 21st century. Its only admonition is despair more. This turn towards helplessness and hopelessness is perhaps the natural culmination of the modern apocalypse. Raptures and seismic events are so last century. You know, everything's online now. And the fear of a swift end is replaced with the fear of a gradually encroaching Armageddon. The knowledge that there is no way to preserve our way of life from destruction because destruction is our way of life. The end of days is now every day, and there is no one cause, no locus of apocalyptic unease, as O'Connell concludes. It's all horsemen all the time. It increasingly feels not like the world will end, but like it already has.
We will be at the point of no return towards a worldwide apocalypse in less than 10 years. The Obama administration is working... Oh, this was printed in 2009.
Well, did we make it? No.
But it's not just dystopian fanatics who have forged a survival strategy based on isolating themselves. In a January 2020 column about omnipresent noise-cancelling headphones and the desire to block out our surroundings, The Economist argued the shared world is increasingly intolerable.
Noise cancelling.
This is how journalist Carl Chaker begins their New York Times piece, How Nothingness Became Everything We Wanted. Writing of a culture-wide quest for self-obliteration, identifying the phenomenon in everything. Noise, decoration, possessions, identities, and face-to-face interaction. This retreat is maybe a rejection of the overstimulation that defines contemporary existence, or simply an inability to continue to cope with it. It's as if we want to get rid of everything in advance, Chaker concludes, including our expectations, so that we won't have anything left to lose.
There's no pain, there's no need for love. You're reborn into an untroubled world.
Once perceived as a threat, this trade-off in Invasion of the Body Snatchers is kind of a vibe right now. In Atessa Moshfegh's 2018 novel My Year of Rest and Relaxation, the narrator seeks sleeping pills that turned everything, even hatred, even love, into fluff I could bat away. My emotions passing like headlights that shine softly through a window, sweep past me, illuminate something vaguely familiar, then fade and leave me in the dark again. Journalist Gia Tolentino compares this liberatory solipsism to what is commonly peddled today as wellness, as well as resembling a form of cognitive interaction induced by social media, which positions the user as the center of the universe and everything else, current events, other people's feelings, as ephemeral, increasingly meaningless stimuli. These tactics are like emotional bunkers, a sliding scale between armed individual shelters and protect your peace. But while the former provides a coping mechanism built on the premise of evading death, even at the end of the world, the latter presents the tantalizing offer of bringing us closer to it. Moshfegh's narrator's ultimate goal is to acquire enough medication to effectively sleep for an entire year. Not actually being dead, but not being awake either. A state once described by Tumblr user Tokyo Sluts as a win-win. An open relationship with death. Death with benefits. A longing for the ultimate nothingness that could contain a Freudian dash of the death drive if one were that way inclined. A force supposedly at work in every living creature, striving to bring it to ruin, and to reduce life to its original condition of inanimate matter. And we don't have to go as far as prescription to feel its effects. Tech writer Max Reed detects the same Freudian phenomenon in social media, saying that what it offers is not death precisely, but oblivion, an escape from consciousness into numb atemporality. It's the turn on, tune in, drop out of late-stage capitalism, where naturally resistance once again gives way to submission. This is the dream of a personal apocalypse, one pill or post at a time. It's no surprise that there's relief in oblivion, freedom from responsibility, obligation, monotony. It's why there's at least one destruction montage in every zombie movie. And a sense that if the worst has happened, then at least we can stop worrying about if and when the worst will happen. There's a certain fantasy in losing everything. If you have less, says architect Corey Duman, you feel like you're more free. So why stop at possessions? Or maybe we just want a chance to explore other avenues are available to us, or to just feel like we've ever had any choice at all.
I love my life. I just sometimes wonder what would happen if it was blown to smithereens and I got to start all over again.
The slow apocalypse of our personal lives is the claustrophobic shrinking of our future. Even more so than the threat of monotonous suburbia that descended on the latter half of the 20th century. A nightmare many can now only dream of. We still suffer the pain of seeing our whole lives play out as soon as we enter education, but now college, marriage, mortgage and kids has been surpassed by a vague but endless hustle and grind. All plots move deathward, repeats Don DeLillo's protagonist in White Noise. But the future used to be a place of possibility, brave new worlds of space travel and the internet. Now, all we can see are the possibilities no longer available to us. If the state of the world feels unbearably uncertain, the state of our own private worlds feel unbearably predetermined. and Apocalypse allows the former to fix the latter. You know, a win-win. In Nikki Lindroth von Baar's short film The Burden, characters evoke nostalgic choreographies of early Hollywood, echoing romantic dreams that have been lost, whittled down to a 9 to 5, or more likely even less forgiving hours. It uncovers life in a disillusioned, emotionally detached society, writes George Zarman at Short of the Week, with the excrescence of mind-numbing capitalism epitomized by the aisles of brightly lit supermarkets and the cubicles of a call center. Ideal conditions to make the apocalypse a tempting liberator, as the film's synopsis dictates.
Ingen sjukdom, ingen värld. När min börda har lyfts från mina axlar.
And the isolation of these spaces suggests that as much as we might be hemmed in, we're simultaneously cast adrift, the roads that would have provided salvation now severed. And yet, despite this rupture, everyone is still singing the same song, united as if in some kind of ancient ritual, connected to each other and to our oral histories, the one thing that remains reassuringly unchanged and universal. We tell ourselves stories in order to live, as Joan Didion famously begins her book of essays, The White Album. We live entirely by the imposition of a narrative line upon disparate images, by the ideas with which we have learnt to freeze the shifting phantasmagoria which is our actual existence. So we tell ourselves stories about the end of the world, because Apocalypse vaults us over the epistemological chasm of the future, O'Connell writes, clear into a final destination, and you can see at last where the whole mess is headed. Every uncertainty, every shifting phantasmagoria, boiled down into one final, unmistakable collapse. But also because it transcends the distance between us on the most fundamental level, the ultimate primetime event. Catastrophe is our bedtime story, suggests a character in Don DeLillo's Zero K, because it's an escape from our personal mortality. We face the end, but not alone. We lose ourselves in the core of the storm. It also provides an antidote to the potentially troubling realization that we're not the objective center of the universe after all, and life will indeed go on without us. There might be some comfort in conflating the end of me with the end of everything. But the post-apocalypse can also offer a counter-reassurance that maybe what feels like the end of everything is not in fact the end of us, on either a macro or micro scale. Emily St. John Mandel's 2014 novel Station 11 begins with a pandemic that wipes out most of the world's population, and filming for the HBO adaptation began in February 2020 before being abruptly postponed for reasons that I'm sure weren't at all ironic. But the story within, unfolding over the 20 years that follow, isn't so much the usual apocalyptic fight for survival as it is about the persistence of community and the creation of art. The ways that art is both a tool for processing trauma and connecting us. The title is taken from a comic book written by one of the characters, in the wake of her own personal devastation, her loss of everything, and completed just before that same seismic shift hits everyone on a global scale. One of its few copies saved and cherished by an 8-year-old girl, who grows up to join a post-apocalyptic theatre troupe, touring the wreckage of civilization, performing Shakespeare. The adaptation of artistic work is shown as not only just as important as our adaptation to life after a cataclysmic event, but as the same thing. Stories are what allow us to make sense of our world. Most of the art featured on the series doesn't exist in its original form, writes Katie Waldman in The New Yorker. It comes filtered through individuals who carry and change it in time, shaping, recontextualizing, extracting what they need. There's a line repeated from the comic book. I've found you 9, maybe 10 times before, and I'll find you again. Always presented devoid of context, it holds no fixed meaning, but as characters repeatedly cycle through love and loss, it comes to resonate most clearly with returning home, which is not a return to how things were, nor a resurrection of things we can never get back, but just acknowledging that we've found peace and joy and stability before, and we'll find it again. Part of the post-apocalyptic fantasy is just wanting to know we can survive devastation. Kyle Chaker writes that numbness beckons when problems seem insurmountable, when there is so much to mourn. But we don't need to soothe ourselves into detachment. In the words of artist Anna Fusco, I don't need to sterilize devastation from my library of emotions. Devastate me, baby. I trust I'll know what to do. We dream of the end because we want release from the unending process of ending, the everything that happens so much, because we want to know that we survive, or because we want to be free from the burden of having to. But even as we fortify our bunkers, the fictions we weave demonstrate that no matter how increasingly intolerable the shared world becomes, we still want to share it. Horse eBooks is the defining text of the last decade because its succinct wisdom is derived from reduction. Sentences cut short, context discarded, reflecting our cultural desire to remove ourselves more and more until there's nothing left. But stripped of specificity, we're also left with statements that were far broader than intended, inviting in at the same time as they withdraw, allowing us to build new meaning, new stories, new lives. Adaptation is in our bones. We have to trust we'll know what to do. Inherently, we're very resilient, says Dr. Robin Gershon. We've been preparing for probably as long as we've been humans. And we can adapt, no matter how hostile the environment.
Noise cancelling.
Oh, much better.
We're alcoholics, drinking gin and tonic, lying in the flowers, counting down the hours. I'd like to welcome all my people in, but listen, everything you love is about to disappear. I feel it coming, the something in the air. But is it living? Count, it's modern living, yeah.